Welcome to the class on the external environment. If you recall, our textbook defines strategy as analysis, decisions, and actions. And so we're going to spend the first couple of classes talking about the analysis, and we're going to start in the external analysis, which is simply the things that are happening outside the firm. And we're going to show you how we break it up and hopefully give you a systematic way to think through an external analysis. Typically, the way that the external analysis grouped is threefold, and I wish I had a textbook used a graphic that depicts it this way because I think it's the best way to understand it. But the first of three concentric circles is the general environment. That's outside. Uh, that's the most outside circle. This is what's happening in the world that could affect your business. The next circle is what's called an industry analysis, and that's represented by the Porter's Five Forces analysis tool. And then inside of that, I think, is specifically the competitor analysis, where you're looking very carefully at your industry competitors. The motivator I have for you is the gentleman that's pictured at the bottom of the slide. That's Mr. Andy Grove. He was a legendary CEO of Intel back in the 1980s through the end of the 20th century. And I'm going to have you read, one of your assigned readings is the foreword to his book, Only the Paranoid Survive. And he's going to tell you in that why he is so big on the external analysis. The outcome of an external analysis is if you're looking at the threats and opportunities that are in the environment for you to capitalize on or that you're going to need to buffer against. I have on the slide, it's things that you must do, and I almost change that to what you may do because you don't have to capitalize on every opportunity, nor sometimes do you have to worry about blunting every threat. But it tends to be more directive than the internal environment that we'll be talking about in the next class. So here's the graphic I wish that was built a little bit differently. The general environment are those factors on the outside, and we'll be talking about them in detail on the next slide. You'll see in there that I've kind of grayed out the global, and I'll explain why again on the next slide. Then the industry environment, and again, that's Porter's Five Forces. And then you see my little red arrow connecting it up shows that I think the competitor analysis needs to fit inside the intensity of rivalry. So let's talk about the general environment. Some of these things are going to be very easy to predict, very easy to see, and therefore fairly hard to profit from because it's just something everybody sees coming a mile away. But sometimes they're not easily seen and they're not easily forecast. And in almost all cases, although companies will try to certain extents, varying based on the force, companies will try to exert an influence on them with varying levels of success. So let's talk about these and give you some examples. Demographic, these tend to be the ones that you can spot a mile away and therefore are hard to capitalize on. For example, we've been talking about literally for decades how America is becoming more Hispanic, more Asian American, less white, such that if not already, very soon there will be no majority in the American population. It'll be simply who's got the plurality having the most of, because no one ethnic group will constitute over 50%. So you see the rise of Hispanic television stations, Hispanic marketing firms, products oriented towards Hispanics, for example. But again, those things are relatively easy to see. The next is social-cultural, and usually these are fairly easy to spot far in advance, but sometimes they can be relatively sudden and cut companies off guard. For example, if you look around today, there's a proliferation of affordable sit-down restaurants, Chili's, On the Border, things like that. I can tell you when I was your age, most of those places didn't exist. And the reason was America was just adjusting to the idea of increasing women in the workforce. And when mama came home tired from work, mama didn't want to cook dinner. And secondly, because mama had a paycheck coming in, families could afford to eat out more. And I still will go into a restaurant during a weeknight and it'll be so crowded. I'm like, where do all these people come from? Because it just wasn't that way when I was growing up as a kid. No, you only went out to eat kind of for business during the middle of the week. Clearly different. But sometimes those social cultural changes can catch you off guard. For example, you see on the graphic, I've got up here what millennials say are their favorite restaurants. Notice where McDonald's fits on that scale, and this is very problematic to them. This is something they're conquering. So you have the Chipotles of the world, which are seen as more authentically sourced food, better for you, simpler menus, and these are very challenging at McDonald's. We may talk about McDonald's a few times in the class because right now they're in the midst of a turnaround that's been ongoing for a year or two as they really understand that they have a problem. So that's a sociocultural shift, this idea of I care more about what's in my food, not just the price, that caught them off guard. The reason I have a parenthesis around the global is because this was put on the charts maybe 20 years ago when the world wasn't nearly so global. Now that it is, frankly, I think these global forces are all subsumed into the more logical categories. So you're not really going to hear me talk about that too much. Another textbook has recently introduced this category called the physical environment, and it has a little bit to do with the concern about global climate change and what firms are doing with that. But it also brings up the impact of sometimes of natural disasters. For example, what was the impact on the nuclear industry with the Fukushima disaster in Japan? It was devastating. And from that tsunami that caused the Fukushima nuclear power plant crisis, a lot of the auto parts manufacturers in Japan were severely disrupted, which had ripples throughout the global auto industry, manufacturing industry. So there's the idea of the physical environment. The last three are very important, and these are the ones I think that can sometimes change very quickly, not always, and can have very dramatic and rapid effects on industries. And let me give you some examples of changes in each of these that are very significant. So in the political legal, I'm going to give you a short action and one that you saw coming and one that people didn't necessarily see coming. They're having dramatic impact. First is the CAFE standards, fuel economy standards. Many of you know that the most popular highest selling, most popular light duty truck is the Ford F-150. Well, in model year 2015, Ford took a huge chance and shifted from steel construction to aluminum construction in many of its bed and other key parts. Why? To save weight. Why? Because of governmentally passed minimum fuel economy standards, and Ford decided the best or a way for them to meet those fuel economy standards was to dramatically lighten the truck by changing the material composition. A huge risk for Ford that was clearly in response to a law. Now let me give you an example of one that's still got people hopping trying to figure it out, and that is the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare. As I make this video, you can see that the private insurers, the Aetnas, the Blue Cross Blue Shields, they are in the midst of consolidation. There were 5 major private insurers. Looks like after consolidation there'll be 3. They figured out that under Obamacare it is a changed world, and they're going for scale because they feel like that is the only way they're going to be able to compete and maintain profits and also maintain market power. In the technological, obviously, anywhere you look, information has revolutionized so many things. So this is undone, for example, the travel agent business. Who goes to a travel agent anymore? You do it online. All of the media distribution has been changed, but I'm going to give you something to think about. Smartphones. Think about how the introduction of the smartphone and handheld palm computing is changing so many industries. It's enabling some, it's devastating others. And I really believe that we're still very early in this opportunity, and that'll be interesting to watch play out. Finally, you have the economic change. And again, this can be very dramatic. For example, a couple of years ago, adverse exchange rates made the Japanese auto manufacturers, with much of their production located in Japan, very vulnerable because it was a high yen. Well, now that's shifted, and relatively speaking, the dollar is high, and that's causing more problem for U.S. auto manufacturers. And this idea of exchange rates is something that we'll talk about more later. If you look at the global petroleum industry, right now, as I make this video, prices are approaching near recent lows. They're below the $40 a barrel. Why? Well, a little bit of oversupply, which has to do with the technology of horizontal drilling and fracking, but also there's global economic. The slowdown in China, the slow economy in Europe are causing consumption to go down, and as consumption goes down, supplies increase, then the price goes down. So what I want you to see from this is there are a lot of factors out there in the external environment that can make a big difference to firms. Next up is going to be Porter's 5 forces. Join me in just a minute.